All right. Okay. So who here has been watching the SEO Mythbusting series on YouTube? That's a few people. That's not enough hands, but let's go through this. So you might be very excited to hear that we are doing a second season, and we're gonna film this year. So hopefully it's gonna come out either very late this year or actually more likely next year. Really, this time it's the SEOs that get to ask me questions. And before I get into the actual questions that you submitted, and then hopefully we might have time left over afterwards for questions live as well. One question that I got asked multiple times is like, was this scripted? To which I can say, truthfully, no, it wasn't scripted. These people came with their questions to me. Yes, we wrote them down so that we actually know what we wanted to talk about, so that it's not like rambling weirdly while we are trying to answer what we actually had agreed on beforehand. But the questions came from web developers. And if you think like these are obvious questions, then now you know how I feel about a bunch of questions coming from SEO sometimes. So, the mission here is to bring together both of these worlds, right? Developers have their questions that SEOs could answer if they would, like trust each other and talk to each other, and vice versa. You have questions towards developers and regarding Google SEO in general, and developers know a bunch of stuff that they might be able to answer that you don't know if you would give them the chance to answer. And if they would, again, trust you and you would trust them. So I hope that in the end of this entire endeavor, my mission to bring SEOs and developers together will succeed eventually. So one ground rule before I get into it. There is a question about ranking in there that I'll happily, that's a lie, I'll answer. But I'm not a ranking expert. I made it a specific thing to not look into ranking because that is a closed environment and it's really, really hard to optimize specifically for ranking. And I believe that you're normally looking at the wrong thing anyways if you're trying to specifically like outrank someone. Because ranking is a tricky one, and my laptop decided to lock itself. That's okay, that's fine. Here we go. God, I love Fallout. I haven't played in a while. I need to get into it. Anyway, getting back into this, let's start with the question that was brought up the most frequent. Is click-through rate, or sometimes people are like dwell time or time spent on page or whatever you want to call it, is that a ranking factor? No. Next question. So the thing is, like, we do use this information. We do use click-through rate. We do use other things that happens on search result pages, but not as a ranking factor. So this is why you get like these really weird mixed signals. It's like, oh, some Googler says that that they are using it, so that means they must be using it for ranking. No. So the thing is, as you might know or might not be aware of, is that we are rolling out lots of tiny changes and sometimes a little larger changes that you know as core updates. And these rollouts happen frequently, and they happen in like percentages, right? We don't just like switch everyone over to a new thing and then see, oh, that actually doesn't work very well, so now we have to roll it back. Whoopsies. We're gonna basically experiment a lot. And click-through rate and all the other things that happen on search result pages is one of these signals that are very, very noisy. So we couldn't really use them for ranking just as a ranking factor. But we do use them to figure out how our, well, let's call them A/B tests, how our A/B tests might be going as one of the many things that we are like using for figuring out if an experiment that we are running on the website is actually working or not. So that's what we mean when we say, yes, we use it. No, it's not a ranking factor that you need to worry about. Right? And sometimes other teams are not aware of this. I remember that like a few people were very excited to be like, haha, gotcha, when a random other Google team in a completely unrelated piece of documentation, I think it was in Cloud or something, they assumed that this might be a ranking factor, so they just put it in their documentation as an example of a ranking factor, and then people are like, haha, and we're like, oh, no. Sorry, not every Googler knows everything that goes on in Google. Like people ask me like, so Martin, you're working at Google? Yes. So my Android Auto, and I'm like, okay. Or like my Gmail does this really weird thing on my computer. And I'm like, oh, okay. Thanks for this information. Sorry? I don't know. So not everyone knows everything. And as I said, like for instance, I make a specific point of not knowing about rendering. For me, I want this to remain a black box because anyone who saw a magic trick from me knows I'm really bad at keeping secrets. That's one thing. I don't want to get myself fired. And the other thing is I am focusing more on the developer side of things, and that's more ranking, crawling, indexing. Rendering. Bullshit. So if you have questions about rendering, indexing, and crawling, that's more my alley, right? So that's the ground rule here. We're not going to discuss rendering, ranking as much. Jesus Christ. This clicker is confusing me. I'm just going to use my own. No, not happening. So another person asked me, Martin, with search engines sometimes, and maybe perceivedly more often than it used to be, not giving giving away the information right on the SERP, rather than pointing the user to the actual websites. Is that a problem? And what are Google's primary users, or what do you care more for, webmasters or users? To which I have a maybe disheartening thing to say, which is we actually care for users, and so should you. Right? It's not webmasters versus users. It's not SEOs against users. If you're doing it that way, maybe find a different profession, like, I don't know, bouncer or something at a discotheque. I don't know. Because, like, you should fundamentally want to give the users whatever they need, whatever they seek. Right? And if that is something that you offer, then you want them to be convinced that you're offering them what they need and what they seek. So there is this example that goes around like, oh my God, now you can basically buy flight tickets right from search engine results. Right? You can basically just go like, flight from Stockholm to Zurich. And then you get the one box that allows you to basically research that right in Google search and then buy a ticket relatively quickly by clicking on a buy button. Now, the hypothesis of the person who brings up this example over and over again is they're stealing your traffic and that's a terrible thing because even as the airline, you don't get people to click on your website. And I'm like, but people buy the flight ticket. Right? And they're probably more likely to buy it because it's faster for them and they get the result that they need quicker. So you're making money unless you're doing something stupid, like, I don't know, have a very stupid intermediate page that people have to click through to then land at the airline website or something like that, right? If you're doing that, then are you offering as much value to the user as they think you should? I don't believe so, because if that would be the case, then our one box wouldn't be so helpful. Right? So these zero-clicks things are not what they seem sometimes. And fundamentally, you should care about the user getting what they need, and hopefully that is what your business offers. If your business offers the user value, then they have no matter or no reason to not click on your website. The same goes for FAQ, and I know that we picked an unfortunate example, in my opinion, when we introduced the FAQ markup example. So if your example is, or if your website is basically explaining how to tie a tie, like how to knot a tie, that's great. But if you're then offering that as an FAQ on Google search, then we are not really necessarily pointing people to your website. That's not what you want. But the FAQ markup is fantastic to give people answers to your products quicker, right? If I'm looking for like, oh, cleaning my toaster, and then that comes right in the search results, and then maybe there's even a link to your website, and I'm like, actually, now that I'm here, I want to do something else anyways. Like, I want to buy a new toaster from this company, and then I click through. So these click-throughs might be fewer, but they are more valuable in the end because people really want to go to your website to begin with. So you're not necessarily losing. And then I asked a bunch of people who were originally complaining that fell silent afterwards. I'm like, so what's happening here? Are you like still mad at us? And they're like, actually, we figured that this doesn't hurt our baseline. It actually sometimes increases conversions or qualified leads. So like, it's a tricky one to judge in general. And I know that some people might have different data or might have different opinions on this, and that's okay. But it's not as black and white as you might think in this case. Next question is, and why is it this? Anyway, that's okay. So other people asked me, and multiple people asked, like, so how do you see the future of structure? This pisses me off. This is like OCD says no pens on stage. Is structured data important? How do you see the development of structured data? Do you think that it becomes more important than it already is? And I think yes, it is important, and it will probably become more important. Why will it become more important? Because structured data is also used in various Google products and will basically give you additional surfaces that you haven't had before. To give you a very simple example, we have talked to, I'm not gonna throw them under the bus. We talked to a product team that wanted developers to use an SDK that they would have to embed into your website and then basically like do extra steps to then get into a specific Google product that talks to you. I'm not gonna name the product that talks to you, but you talk to it and it talks back to you. There's many of them, right? Anyway, so like let's go for it. Like the Google Assistant team was like, how do we get let's say, for instance, recipe information that we can then read out to people as they request a recipe. And they're like, maybe we need to build this JavaScript library that you have to include into your website. And 10 steps further, you're going to be read out on Google Assistant. And we're like, yeah, one way of doing it. The other way would be just use the existing recipe markup that is already there. And millions of websites have it, if not more. And then they're like, yeah, that sounds legit. So now you're getting additional exposure through this other surface, the Google Assistant and Google Home, that you didn't have before just because you eventually added this markup to your website. And this is going to continue. And I think this is a great way of using the power of the web and using the power of semantic data. So I highly recommend looking into it and potentially investing in structured data on your website. Why am I even taking this clicker if it's dead anyway? Then someone asked, like, so the YouTube SEO people are always talking about the Google Brain thing that they use on YouTube, and is that the same as RankBrain? No, it's not the same. I don't know exactly what they mean when they say that, because I don't really talk as much with the YouTube SEO people. But basically, there is a team or a department or multiple teams within this department under the umbrella of Google Brain. And they are basically working on all sorts of machine learning research and basically figuring out how we can leverage machine learning and artificial intelligence to better use the data that we can already access and we already have. And that's the Google Brain team. So they do a bunch of different stuff. They do internal toolings, they do external facing things, they do things like RankBrain, they do things like other projects that I'm not sure if we have actually ever publicly mentioned. But like there's a bunch of machine learning happening in the background, and that's under the umbrella of Google Brain. And then RankBrain is one specific application of that. So Google Brain and RankBrain are related. They're not the same thing though. RankBrain is the umbrella within which Google Brain is built and evolves. Does the crawler have a name? Does the spider have a name? Does the robot have a name? Yes, Googlebot. There we go. But I'd like to use this question as an opportunity to also go a little deeper, because like there was a little bit of confusion. At some point, some people see unusual Googlebots in their logs, or they see like really weird user agent strings sometimes, or I don't know, they just get confused, and then we get questions like, so what is this? I think the speak aloud or read aloud or something like that was a case of that. People are like, what is this read aloud thing that comes and like crawls my website every now and then? The reason for this is that fundamentally, if you look at what Googlebot actually is, it is a piece of shared infrastructure. So we have basically an API or a service that you can talk to programmatically that does all the crawling and that deals with robots.txt, but you can configure if it does or if it doesn't. And basically it's infrastructure to crawl the web at scale, and multiple teams are using it. Right? If I were to ask for, so I have to get permission. If I were to, I don't know, crawl the entire web to find out what are all websites that have cat pictures on it. So I want to build like Google Cats, which is like a Google search for cat images, obviously. So if I were to build that, I would basically just get permission to access this piece of infrastructure, and then I get to use this shared service that we are having that is pretty much also used by Googlebot and others. And I can then supply what I want this to be called externally, as in like what it is announces itself to be, right? And I can either use like Googlebot, which is a very generic string, for which I also need permission actually, but I could also ask for my own string. So I can say like Google Cats, and then you would see in your server logs that Google Cats has accessed a bunch of cat images on your website. So this is why this happens sometimes. And as we are building our infrastructure and as we are evolving Google infrastructure and Googlebot specifically, we are basically running experiments every now and then you might see an unusual user agent. Some people actually don't see that, which is interesting. So I don't know who here has heard of the evergreen Googlebot when we announced it at Google I/O. Who? Not very. What? Okay, interesting. So the Googlebot is now evergreen. Just FYI, like we are keeping updating the Chrome version that we are running within a few weeks of every Google Chrome stable release. So it's no longer using Google 41. If you think that we are using Google 41, you're wrong. We are not. We haven't updated the user agent yet, so if you look at your server logs, you're still seeing Google 41, Chrome 41, because it breaks websites if we update that. It will be updated in December, so if your website breaks with a newer Googlebot version or Chrome version, I have bad news for you. You should fix that until December. Good luck. Yes, so I was surprised. So we were, as I said, like we weren't rolling out the new Googlebot version like that for everyone. We were testing it carefully, and only very, very few people actually caught us testing the new version of Chrome in Googlebot, because not many people are actually testing what Googlebot can do, which I found surprising, because that's very valuable information. But no, everyone was very, very concerned about the click-through rate thing. Good focusing there. Much value for money. So yeah. The other thing is we have announced that nofollow is basically changing, right? You heard that. Great. So nofollow used to be a directive, which meant that if you said like links are nofollow, then we wouldn't follow it. That will change at some point in the future. I don't know what the timeline was, but basically eventually we will start treating them as a directive, which means as a hint, which means like we're like, okay, you don't want us to use this, but if we find out that we can actually use this without generating any harm, then we will do that. Right? So then the question was like, do I need to do something? Yes, you might have to do something. You want to have a look at the new relation attributes. There's UGC for user-generated content where like, I can't vouch for this because this is literally user-generated. There's relation sponsored for links that you bought, which is fine. If someone like sponsors you a link or basically gives you money to be linked to, you can tell us that. It's okay. And then the next question was, so why do I still have to annotate my links if Google can figure it out? Well, then I can ask you, why do you annotate canonicals? Because we can mostly figure it out. Because you might disagree with what we think is happening, right? And then we have to make a call, and it's not always like, oh yeah, this is obviously a sponsored link. This is obviously a link that we shouldn't follow. It's not as easy as that. And if in doubt, we will use your hint. Yes, we have 5 more minutes? Okay, wow, this time has flown. So you give us a hint which informs us to make a decision, to make hopefully a better decision in your favor, right? It's not about our algorithms being perfect. Algorithms will never be perfect. There's always going to be edge cases. We heard like you can build a fake profile that even humans can't spot as such. But if you tell us that you don't trust this profile or that you won't vouch for it specifically, then we can be like, so we think we can trust this, but you say you wouldn't want us to trust this, and we would not be sure what the effects are, so we're probably going to go with what you just told us rather than risking anything. Should you be writing, so how about content density, and should you be writing for search engines or should you be writing for users or visitors? Users and visitors. Seriously, like keyword density is so overrated. Just look at what your users need, what your users want, write for your users and focus on that side. Your users come first. Search engines are basically, our mission is to get it right if you do it right for the user. Yes, we don't always get there, but that's what we strive for. So you will eventually be left behind if you are not trying to like write for your actual users, but you're trying to game a system that keeps changing. That's pretty stressful. I wouldn't be wanting that stress on my shoulders. Is there a rendering budget? No, there's not. Next question. So, so the rendering budget question and the question on how long does it take for us to render JavaScript websites go hand in hand. We are trying to detect when the website is finished. There is not really a rendering budget per se, but obviously if we can not tell that the website will eventually be done with whatever it does, and the CPU keeps cycling, eventually we'll be like, maybe this is an infinite loop, maybe we shouldn't be running this anymore. So just try to make it work for users and you'll be fine. Rendering budget is something that you shouldn't be worried about. And the rendering delay is also something that our data shows you shouldn't be worried about. Yes, there are horror stories like, it took a week. And then you look at the website, like very, very few people ever came through with URLs for us to verify that. And those who did, it was like very low quality content, or it was content that was purely a test page that was terrible. So we're like, yes. So we crawl this, we see like it's terrible, and every page that links to it was terrible after rendering. So why would we render it? Like if every signal points to this page being really, really bad, and then we like render it eventually and it turns out to be bad, why would we constantly keep rendering it again and again? And the fact that it's not indexed is not basically telling you if it has been rendered or not. It just tells you we haven't indexed it, which if it's a really bad test page, it's kind of obvious. Right? So like it's a tricky one. I know that some pages are actually struggling with long rendering times, but it's very, very few and very, very interesting edge cases that we consider bugs on our side, and we are working on fixing them. I hope that I have more data to share in the future, but let me just say like most cases get done in seconds or minutes, worst case hours. So it's not as bad as people make you believe. It's like, oh, it's going to take weeks. Nah, not really. How does Googlebot treat PWAs? We are basically treating progressive web apps as as websites or normal websites. So we don't execute service workers. So if you have a service worker that allows your website to work offline, we ignore that. But pretty much besides that, we're just treating it as a normal website. So you don't have negative sides. But if you're doing performance right, then at least you have performance on your site, which is actually helping you as a ranking factor and so on and so forth. And for your users is good as well. So do we also support web workers? That's an area of research. We do support web workers, but they have a few limitations. I think Barry wrote an article on that because there was a tweet thread going on where I explained the limitations. Fundamentally, yes, we do, but be careful if you use web workers to offload work. Which metric for speed matters? The answer is, oh, you know that one. It depends. Hey, haven't said that so far, have I? It really depends. If you are looking at crawl budget, then clearly your time to first byte is important. But if you're looking at user experience, then you want to make sure that the content shows up. And then it depends a little bit on what your website is like. If your website is mostly an informational landing page or a marketing page or a product detail page, you want the content to show up as quickly as possible. First, contentful paint is very important for you. Whereas if it's a very interactive website, where it's like a chat portal or I don't know, like an auctioning website where people should be interacting with it, it's very important that not only the content shows up very quickly and I can't interact with it, it has to be interactive quickly. Like the time to the first interactive delay is actually really, really important in that case. We are using a mix of metrics and this mix keeps changing, so do not try to optimize for one number here. Lighthouse, page speed insights, and all these give you a number. That's just an indicator for you that you can dig into something or not. It doesn't matter if it's 90, 95, 93, 98, or 100. If your page is fast, that's great. If your page is slow, if you get like 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 maybe, that's something where I would look into where are the low-hanging fruit that you can optimize for, right? Cool. What should we do about core algorithm updates? Just go about your business. It's fine. Trust me.